I'd like to have you define the Christ level of consciousness, if you could, and how do you understand God and man's relationship to God, how you see it.
The Christ consciousness, we'll start with that first, because that's a part of God. I've noticed a lot of religions are more into the Christ than they're into God. It's like Jesus will save you, Jesus will save you. Well, what about God? You know, Jesus is like God's kid. So you're looking to a kid to save you rather than, you know, the higher up dude. I've learned to go straight for God, but I've also learned about the Christ consciousness on the way. The Christ consciousness is a state of awareness, from lack of a better term, that maintains awareness, creates consciousness, and has the ability, apparently, to affect human beings. One of the best ways that it does that is with Jesus. Jesus was the man. The Christ consciousness is something that came into him after he did his 40-day fast. Jesus was a man like the rest of us. We're just all people. And so he sort of like conditioned himself to be able to receive a higher state of awareness that would increase all of his potential. It allowed him to perform feats that, you know, we're just learning how to do today. He was able to bring people back from the dead. If you were blind, you could see. If you were deaf, you could hear. He could walk into a village, wave his arm, everybody got better. This is what he learned from the Christ consciousness. Now, the Christ consciousness, it's given that title, and then religions kind of jumped onto it really heavily, and I think that the real picture of what it is has been distorted. I believe that the Christ consciousness has come back onto this planet several times, but each time it comes back, just as we grow and the human race grows, so does this consciousness grow. The consciousness has gotten so incredibly large that no one person carries it anymore. Actually, groups of people carry it now. The last time, from my observation, that it was carried by the scientists. I looked at the planet. We had people like Einstein, Freud, Young, Tesla, Edison. If you took a good look, all of the geniuses of the planet all came through at one particular time. I studied all their lives, too. I began to notice that all these great men, sometimes when they would be talking to themselves, weren't talking to themselves in their same voice. And that neighbors would make comments that they didn't think that it was Einstein. It didn't sound like it was Einstein. It didn't sound like it was Tesla. It didn't sound like it was Freud. And that these people would talk to themselves a lot. I'm also aware of the fact that science made some of the greatest leaps that it ever made. I believe that that consciousness, and let's just take the word Christ off and let's leave it as a consciousness. I believe that was a consciousness that was here during these last, it was from the late 1800s into the 1900s, because most of them, all these great beings are dead now. But they were all scientists, and they opened up all of the latest fields for us that we're now using to discover our latest technology and our latest insights. And so I don't believe it's the Christ consciousness. I believe that's just a title that we gave in terms of Christos because it was a religious name, and Christianity picked up on that. But I think it's a living consciousness, part of God, obviously, that has the ability to visit the planet, for lack of a better term, and influence great people at great times during history. And if you look back through history, you can pretty much figure out when it showed up, because several people at a time kept receiving these great insights, and then the human race would make another tremendous leap. I mean, the leap that we have made in the last 90-some years, or last 100 years, is phenomenal. I mean, do you realize that it was only in 1904 we hadn't even learned how to fly yet? 1904, at Kitty Hawk or whatever it was, that's the first time we learned how to fly. I mean, if you really want to scare yourself, in the 1400s, which was only like 500 years ago, we still thought we lived on a flat planet. I mean, nobody knew the planet was round. So when you take a good look, what we have done in the last 100 years is awesome. What we've accomplished in the last 100 years hasn't been accomplished in the last 7, 8, 9,000 years by humanity as a whole. Now, something's out there giving us a hand. I just call it God. Sometimes God's just a little too powerful, so it has to send part of its consciousness down, and then we can work with that. So I believe that the consciousness is an attribute of God. It's here designed to help us. And it comes in many forms. Sometimes it comes for religion, sometimes it comes for science, sometimes it's come for the arts. I mean, there were those times when all the artists made these great steps in terms of beauty for the planet, the art for the soul, and you can trace it and find they were all pretty much during the same length of time also. I think that same consciousness affects all the sciences and the arts. Hope I didn't push anybody's buttons out there. But it is about expanding. It is taking broader looks. I mean, Jesus didn't tell you you would do far greater works if it didn't know you had somebody out there to give you a hand. And if Jesus can do it, so can you. That's what he said. We're not making things up. Check the Bible.
So you're saying that the Christ consciousness is something that Jesus used?
Yes.
Or got into?
He figured out, he trained himself for all of those years with the greatest teachers. He went out, and I'll tell you what, before he got to Christ consciousness, he demonstrated his love for God, and then God allowed the consciousness to take over. So that's why I always go to God first. I know the consciousness is there to help me on the physical plane, but I also know I have a soul that I have to understand God from. And once I can understand that part of the divinity, then the rest seems to come to me.